From the shadow of the doorway to Class 3, a war veteran Jack Carter stood frozen, his faithful dog Rex at his side, his gaze fixed on a sight that broke a father's soul. There, his precious daughter Emily teetered on her prosthetic leg and crutches. Trembling as the teacher, a woman this town revered, aimed a finger at her and yelled with cruel intent. The room erupted in laughter, every single laugh a shard of glass sharper than any shrapnel Jack had ever taken, his hands coiled into fists at his sides. This was no battlefield. This was a public shaming masked as education, and his daughter was the target. If you feel that no child deserves to be ridiculed for who they are, then you need to see this story through. And if it resonates deep within your soul, hit subscribe and join us for tales that rekindle belief in goodness and the silent strength of empathy. We wish you a day full of comfort and serenity. A gentle golden light spilled across the valley of Silver Creek as the morning sun crested the peaks, a serene mountain town, its pine roofs and gravel roads veiled in morning mist. 6 months had passed since Jack Carter walked away from the war, yet the echoes of conflict haunted him like a persistent ghost. At 42, he was a tall, broad-shouldered man, the exhaustion of his past carved permanently into the lines of his face. That morning's routine was no different than any other. He pulled on an olive-drab field jacket, worn blue jeans and leather boots shined out of pure instinct, topping it with a black cap, the word veteran, stitched in white. He wasn't a soldier anymore, but his body hadn't forgotten the rhythm. His wife was gone now, lost in a car wreck years before. His daughter Emily had made it through, but the crash claimed a piece of her leg. But somehow she discovered the courage to move on. And now with Rex, their devoted German shepherd, by their side, the small family had sought refuge in Silver Creek, praying for tranquility. The town's elementary school was perched on the edge of a hillside, its grounds encircled by maple trees ablaze in red and gold. Jack brought the old gray pickup to a halt by the main gate. Emily tightened her grip on her book bag strap, her eyes lifting to the school with a silent, nervous energy. At 8 years old, she was petite, her pale blonde hair brushing her shoulders, and her slate blue eyes constantly scanned for safety before daring to trust. She wore the simple school uniform, a cream-colored blouse beneath a navy skirt, and a matching sweater. With her crutches tucked securely under her arms, the subtle gleam of her prosthetic leg catching the sun's first rays. Rex stayed right by her side, his rich sable fur shimmering with hues of bronze and tan in the sunlight, each stride steady and deliberate. In the front office, a receptionist smiled warmly as she passed Jack a registration form. "That'll be Class 3A, she offered. "With Miss Martha Hale. She's one of our finest teachers, adored by the whole community." Jack gave a nod of thanks. But that word adored didn't quite sit right with him. He gently squeezed Emily's shoulder, a silent promise of support. "You're going to be fine," he murmured, forcing a steady confidence into his voice. The little girl just nodded, her eyes downcast. They moved as one down the hall, guided by the echoes of children's laughter and squeaky sneakers. Room 3A was at the very end. Inside, Miss Martha Hale stood organizing papers on her desk with meticulous care. She appeared to be in her late 30s, of average height, dressed in a light gray blouse, neatly tucked into a long, dark skirt. A lavender silk scarf knotted perfectly at her throat. Her auburn hair was softly curled at the tips, framing a placid face that from a distance seemed gentle and kind. But a keen sharpness was revealed up close. Her smile when she looked up was perfect. "The Carters, I presume?" She purred, her voice a well-rehearsed melody. "Welcome to Class 3A." Jack knelt by Emily's desk, ensuring her books were in reach. "I'll be back right after class, kiddo," he promised. Emily nodded, her small hand gripping the pencil like a lifeline. Jack rose, offering Miss Hale a courteous, distant nod. As Jack stepped into the hall, Rex froze, his amber gaze locked on the woman by the board. His tail went entirely rigid. A low growl vibrated deep in his chest. Jack's brow furrowed as he whispered, "Easy, boy." Yet even as they moved down the hall, Rex glanced back, his unease clear. The lesson began at first routine with children writing out their names, whispering of recess. Emily focused on keeping her head down her crutch, silent against the cold tile floor. Then came the instant that changed everything. "Emily," Miss Hale said with a false sweetness, "why don't you stand and read the next sentence?" A hush fell over the room. The little girl rose, balancing carefully on her prosthetic. But before a word could escape her lips, the teacher added, "Careful now, dear. Not everyone has your unique way of standing so firm." The words dripped like honey, laced with venom. Laughter erupted. Some kids snickered openly while others just covered their mouths. Emily froze, her face a canvas of fire. The laughter swelled, echoing off the walls, a cruel chorus aimed right at her. But not all of them laughed. Near the window sat Noah, a quiet boy with a mop of brown hair. And beside him, Olivia, a girl in glasses too large for her face. Their shared look held no humor, only a palpable discomfort. Noah's brow creased as he saw Emily's trembling hands. Olivia murmured to him, but neither one of them spoke out. Their gazes followed Emily with silent sympathy as the rest of the class looked away. They could not have known it then, but that quiet moment of compassion was the very first link in a chain of unbreakable courage. Out in the hall, Rex's body went rigid again, his ears erect. A sound had reached him, faint yet sharp, the kind that signified distress. A low growl rumbled in his throat as he paced by the door. Jack, returning from the main office, stopped cold. "What is it?" he whispered. The dog's stance was unmistakable. It communicated tension, unease, protection. Jack moved silently to the door of Class 3. His own instincts flaring to life like a flipped switch. Through the narrow glass pane, he could see Miss Hale looming over Emily's desk. The teacher's lips moved, her voice unheard, but her finger jabbed the air with a sharp point, almost accusingly, as Emily sat frozen, her eyes wide and shoulders trembling. The other children just watched on in silence, afraid to intervene. Jack's jaw set tight. There was no gunfire, no smoke in the air, but the feeling in the air was identical. Danger, just wearing a different face. Rex's growl deepened, a vibration warning through the quiet hall. Finally, the bell rang. Children rushed by Jack, laughing as they shoved books into their backpacks. Emily emerged last, her eyes rimmed red but defiantly dry, her lips a silent line. Jack knelt to meet her gaze. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice soft. She nodded too fast, her own voice a fragile whisper. "I am okay." He knew she wasn't telling the truth, but let it pass for now. Rex moved between them, his head turned back, a final glance at the classroom, as if sealing a grim memory. The drive home was shrouded in silence, only the pickup rattling down the dirt road. Sunlight fractured through the trees, a beautiful world she couldn't see. Emily stared blankly out the window, the houses melting into an unseen landscape. Jack's eyes were fixed on the horizon, his knuckles whitening on the wheel with every small jolt that made her flinch beside him. In the back, Rex remained a steadfast sentinel, his gaze never leaving the girl, a silent vow in his solemn eyes. That night, an unnerving stillness fell over the house. Emily had sought refuge in sleep early, curled against Rex's comforting warmth. Jack, however, sat alone at the kitchen table, a solitary figure in the dim light. The low hum of the refrigerator was the only sound breaking the silence. He opened a worn notebook, a relic that had borne witness to every deployment, and began to write. "Something's wrong at that school." The words were stark on the page. Then after a heavy pause, he added a second line, "I will protect her." It was a promise, a declaration for a new kind of war, the ink bleeding slightly into the weathered paper. His script was firm, yet every letter was weighted with a father's love and a warrior's fury. He snapped the notebook shut and leaned back in his chair. A thin line of light still glowed from under Emily's door. He heard Rex shift the soft thump of a paw on the floor, a loyal guardian at his post. Outside Silver Creek slept peacefully, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing inside Classroom 3A. A battle that wouldn't be fought with guns or flags, but with cruelty and silence. And deep within that silence, a father's promise was forging into a weapon. A full week had passed since that unsettling morning at Silver Creek Elementary, but its oppressive weight remained clinging to the very air they breathed. Jack Carter had desperately tried to convince himself that the storm would pass on its own, that maybe he'd misunderstood what he'd glimpsed through the door of Classroom 3A, but children learn their lessons well, and a seed of cruelty once planted grows with frightening speed. Autumn's chill deepened, mirroring the coldness of each new morning. Every day began with the same heart-wrenching ritual, Emily moving stiffly down the hall on her crutches, her father's forced smile vanishing the moment she turned away, and Rex, a silent guardian, watching from the truck's window, his sharp amber eyes fixed on the school doors, a loyal soldier standing his post. Inside the classroom, the whispers had festered into a constant, venomous hum. When Emily dropped a pencil, it would mysteriously roll just beyond her reach, forcing an awkward, painful stretch. No one ever offered to help. Some just looked away, others hid cruel smirks. And whenever she summoned the courage to ask a question, the boy sitting behind her would parrot her words in a mocking falsetto, followed by a wave of stifled laughter. Then, one morning, she opened her notebook to find a folded piece of paper tucked inside. On it, written in the clumsy scrawl of a child, were two words that felt like a punch to her heart: one-legged freak. She quickly folded the note, its poison sealed, and slipped it deep into her pocket. Too afraid to discard the evidence, too ashamed to share her pain, and Miss Martha Hale presided over this silent torture with impeccable grace. To the parents, she was the town's beloved educator, the heart of every charity, drive the one who stayed late, perfecting the bulletin boards. But the moment that classroom door swung shut and the hallway noise faded, her warmth would vanish, hardening into something cold and sharp. She would single Emily out for tasks designed to be difficult, wiping the high chalkboard carrying a heavy stack of books. And when the girl faltered, Martha's voice would ring out a false note of encouragement for the whole class to hear. "We mustn't let our weaknesses define us. Now must we, Emily?" She would say, every syllable a polished stone, every smile a perfect mask. The children were fast learners. They began to echo her tone, her gestures, and her exquisitely tailored cruelty. During recess, Emily would sit by herself under the old rusted slide, the biting wind a sharp sting against her skin. But she remained a solitary figure, tracing invisible patterns in the dust with her crutch. From across the playground, Noah and Olivia shared a look heavy with concern. Noah, a boy of 9 with sandy hair and eyes far too somber for his age, gave Olivia a gentle nudge. She was a smaller girl, her round glasses always slipping down her nose, her voice so soft it was often lost in the noise. "She's crying again," Noah whispered. Olivia paused, then quietly made her way over. Placing half her sandwich beside Emily, an unspoken offering, Noah joined her, pretending to fix a shoelace so their alliance would go unnoticed. No words were exchanged, but for those few moments Emily was not alone. By the end of the week, the cruel game had seeped beyond the classroom walls. Whispers trailed her in the cafeteria, haunted the hallways, and followed her all the way to the bus stop. Then someone began leaving small, cruel drawings on her desk, stick figures, with one leg viciously crossed out. Martha never uttered a single word. Once, when Emily tried to voice her pain, the teacher's thin smile was a blade. "You must learn not to be so sensitive to a little joke." The words struck deeper than any laughter ever could. Noah and Olivia did what they could to shield her, sliding her textbooks within reach, wiping away the glue and crumbs the others intentionally left on her desk. But their kindness made them outcasts too. "Pity squad!" a voice had jeered. And from then on, the three of them became a silent island at the corner lunch table, quiet and unseen. Each morning as Jack dropped Emily off, Rex's instincts screamed that something was wrong. The moment they reached the gate, his tail went rigid, and a low, threatening growl rumbled in his chest. At first, Jack wrote it off as a dog's simple restlessness. But by the third day, he could no longer deny the chilling pattern. Every time Rex looked at that classroom, his ears would flatten, and the hair along his spine would rise. "What is it, boy?" Jack would murmur. The dog could only answer with a desperate whine, pulling toward the school, as if to shield her himself. The veteran in Jack knew he couldn't ignore such a warning, not from a partner who had once saved lives on the battlefield. That night, Emily just pushed her food around her plate, her appetite gone. When Jack asked about school, she gave him a small, brittle smile that fractured his heart. "It's fine," she said, her voice hollow. Later, as he tucked her into bed, he saw a faint finger-shaped bruise near her wrist. She pulled her sleeve down before he could even ask. "I fell," she whispered. From the floor, Rex lifted his head, his gaze steady and knowing. After Jack turned off the light, he stood in the hallway for a long time, his heart aching as he listened to his daughter's troubled sleep. Twice that night she woke up crying, but when he rushed in, she only said she had dreamed of the sound of laughter. By the weekend, Jack's deep unease had hardened into cold suspicion. He began arriving earlier for pickup, waiting by the fence where he had a clear view of the classroom windows. From that distance, Miss Hale was the very image of a model teacher, smiling patiently and waving to parents. But through the glass, when she thought no one was watching, her mask would fall. Her movements became sharp, her smile gone. Jack watched her lean in close to Emily, her words like quick, sharp jabs. Her tone was severe. Emily's small body would tense with every word. The sight made Jack's own pulse hammer in his throat. He was not an imaginative man, and Rex's constant low growl only confirmed the terrible certainty that was forming deep in his gut. That evening, Jack went to the office to speak with her directly. Martha greeted him with a practiced, graceful warmth. She wore a cream cardigan with a silver dove pin. "Mr. Carter," she began, her tone a disarming musical lilt, "Emily is adjusting just beautifully. She's a bright girl, a little sensitive perhaps, but she is learning." Jack hesitated, his eyes searching her face. "She's been so quiet lately," he said. "And I've seen some bruises." Martha laughed lightly, a hollow sound. "Oh, children fall." "And the others? Well, they are also children, too. Some teasing happens, but we guide them. You have my word." Her gaze remained steady, her smile never faltered. He wanted to believe her, but a dissonant note rang false beneath her calm voice. He remembered that Monday. He tried to shake the thought away as he watched Emily limp toward the school's entrance. Her small frame was swallowed by the crowd. As she turned to wave, Rex barked sharply, startling the nearby parents. An embarrassed Jack hushed him, but the dog's gaze stayed locked on the school. For the rest of that day, Jack was distracted all day at work. His mind replayed that sound, low, urgent, protective. He knew that specific bark. Once in Afghanistan, just seconds before an ambush. Rex always knew long before anyone else did. That memory made his grip tighten on the steering wheel as he drove to the school. When the final school bell rang, Emily was one of the last children to finally emerge. Her uniform was rumpled with a chalk dust smear on her sleeve. She smiled faintly when she saw him, but the light didn't reach her eyes. Jack felt his chest tighten. He gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, murmuring, "You don't have to pretend with me, Em." She just shook her head, whispering, "I'm okay, Daddy." The gentle lie shattered him more than any hard truth ever could have. As they walked toward the truck, Rex moved close, pressing against Emily's side, sniffing her sleeve, then licking her hand. She smiled at him, the only one she trusted. That night, as the sky bled to black over Silver Creek, Jack sat again at his old kitchen table, his journal open. The lamp's light washed over his calloused hands that had carried men through fire and endless rain. He wrote slowly, forming each letter with care. Something is happening inside that classroom. And then beneath it, another line. The enemy hides behind kindness. He stared at the damning words for a long time before closing the book. Outside, a low wind whispered against the windows, and Rex, lying faithfully near the door, let out a low growl that was swallowed by the dark. By the cold end of October, Silver Creek finally surrendered to the very first chilling breath of winter. The air became sharp and brittle, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke that settled over town like a forgotten memory. Frost now covered the school windows each morning, and the playground lay deathly silent beneath pale, empty skies. Jack Carter now dreaded those cold mornings. Emily spoke less and smiled even less. A hollowness haunted her eyes, a sorrow far older than her 8 years. When she slept, she would whimper softly in her sleep, and Rex, a guardian by her bed, would lift his head at every sound, alert, protective, waiting for the danger he could sense but not name. Inside Class 3A, the air felt heavier each day. The taunts had quieted to whispers, but the cruelty remained a stain that refused to fade. It was then Noah, always an observer from the sidelines, began to see the pattern, how the teacher's voice would soften the moment a parent stepped into the room, only to turn frigid and sharp once they had left. He saw the way Emily would flinch every time her name was called. One morning after another cruel remark was veiled as a lesson, he made a choice that would set everything in motion. He took a small voice recorder from his older brother, a device that fit in his palm with a tiny, pulsing red light, and buried it deep inside his backpack before heading for school. This wasn't courage, just a desperate feeling that someone had to act, even if they wouldn't believe a kid. The next day, Noah sat 2 desks behind Emily, pretending to sketch as the recorder drank in every sound. Martha Hale was in a foul mood, stalking the aisles between desks with her usual chilling sense of authority. She paused next to Emily, her eyes locked on the girl's labored handwriting. "You call this an effort?" she seethed, her voice a low growl laced with venom. "Even with one leg, you should at least try to appear capable." A few students stifled nervous giggles. The color drained from Emily's face. An apology escaped her lips, a sound no louder than a breath. Martha leaned closer, her voice like a shard of ice. "Don't apologize. Improve." Noah's stomach churned. His hand trembled over his notebook, but he refused to look up. When recess arrived, he slipped into the quiet of the restroom to check the recorder. The red light was still blinking. He pressed play, and his heart pounded as he heard it all. The voice, the words, the kind of cruelty no adult would accept without proof. That afternoon, Olivia witnessed a pain that kindness alone could not mend. She was near the door when Martha told Emily to clean the board after class. The girl hesitated for a moment, her crutch leaning awkwardly against the wall. "Use your hand," the teacher said with cold dismissal. "You still have one." Olivia froze, watching Emily struggle to reach the high corner, her small frame shaking from the exertion. As she faltered, Martha stepped toward her, seizing the girl's chin, twisting her face upward with a cruel deliberateness. "Look at me when I speak to you," she hissed. Tears welled, but Emily did not cry. A knot of ice formed in Olivia's stomach. She wanted to scream to make it stop, but the words were trapped in her throat. When the final bell chimed, she was the last one out, watching from the doorway, as Emily finally let her own tears fall, wiping them with trembling fingers. That evening, Olivia found Noah, telling him everything. They met behind the bike racks, the wind rattling the chain-link fence around them. "We can't let her keep doing this," Noah said, his voice low as he clutched his backpack. "I recorded her. We have proof now." Olivia's eyes grew wide behind her glasses. "Are you going to tell someone?" she whispered. He slowly shook his head. "Not yet. We need more. If it's just one day, they'll say I'm making it up." The 2 children stood there in the gathering darkness as the last trace of light disappeared. For the very first time, they understood that doing the right thing felt just as terrifying as remaining silent. The next morning, Jack arrived at the school earlier than usual. He parked his truck quietly along the curb, his breath fogging in the cold air. Rex sat beside him, every muscle alert, his tail perfectly still. Through the windshield, Jack watched the schoolyard fill with children. His eyes found Emily so small and quiet, her breath a tiny cloud against the morning chill. The moment she turned for the entrance, Rex instantly stiffened. His ears pinned back, his body coiled, and before Jack could even move, he exploded from the truck, yanking the leash from Jack's grip. The dog stormed the school entrance, his barks deep and guttural, sharp concussions of sound that rattled across the yard. Heads turned eyes wide with alarm. Jack raced after him, his voice cracking his name. By the time he caught up, Rex had already shouldered past 2 students and planted himself at the threshold of classroom 3A, unleashing a furious volley of barks at Miss Hale. Inside, the teacher froze, her smile dissolving. Emily sat paralyzed at her desk, her eyes huge. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Then Jack was there, his hand clamping onto Rex's collar, his own heart hammering against his ribs. "I'm so sorry," he stammered. "He's never like this." But then his eyes found his daughter's face so pale, so frightened with raw red marks ghosting her neckline, and the words caught in his throat. Miss Hale simply smoothed her skirt, a thin smile playing on her lips. "Well, animals can be so unpredictable," she cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Perhaps he just sensed all the excitement. "No harm done." Jack managed a nod, but inside him, a dam of denial began to crack, a terrifying truth seeping through the silence she left behind. Later that night, as he helped Emily with her pajamas, Jack saw the marks again stark against her skin, small, almost perfectly round bruises just below her collarbone. "What's this from Sweetie?" he asked gently. Emily went completely still. Then she forced a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. I tripped. My crutch slipped." He held her gaze, seeing the lie swimming in her eyes. "Emily," he whispered, his voice aching. "You can tell me anything." She just shook her head, tears blurring her vision. "It's nothing, Daddy, please." Every part of him wanted to push for the truth, but she was already trembling, so he just kissed her forehead and switched off the light. After closing her door, he leaned against the cool wall of the hallway, crushed by the weight of all the unspoken words in their home. The very next afternoon, the school nurse Clara Bennett started connecting dots that everyone else had missed. Clara, in her early 40s, was a tall woman with kind eyes that held a sharp intelligence, eyes that saw everything. For more than a decade, she had overseen every student's health records. So when Noah appeared in her office complaining of a stomachache, she knew the name instantly. It was her own son. But it was the note in Emily's file about bruises marked accidental that truly snagged her attention. A feeling of deep unease began to stir within her. Later that evening at home, she found herself sifting through piles of medical forms, and a chilling pattern began to emerge. 5 children, all in the same classroom, all with minor injuries, all with the same explanation: slipped, fell, or bumped. This was no coincidence. She stared down at the list, her jaw tightening with resolve. "Martha Hale," she whispered, the name tasting like rust and betrayal in her mouth. Meanwhile, Noah sat on the floor of his bedroom, the small recorder resting in his lap. He played the recording over and over, the venom in his teacher's voice coiling around those words. The one-legged girl, spoken like a curse. Olivia sat beside him, cross-legged, her hands tightly clasped. "We have to show someone," she urged. Noah gave a slow, determined nod. "My mom," he murmured, his voice gaining strength. "She'll believe us." Beyond his window, the night was still and quiet, but the distant sound of Rex's barking carried on the wind a steady, certain rhythm in the darkness, as if he knew the truth was finally taking its first breath. And that very same night, Jack picked up his pen and wrote in his notebook, "She is hiding something, and my patience has finally run out." His hand trembled slightly as he carved a double line beneath the words. He had no idea that across town a battle was already beginning. Noah's mother was already piecing the terrible truth together. The next morning, frost wept down the window panes, chased away by a revealing sun. Yet within the halls of Silver Creek Elementary, a chilling silence held sway, filled with truths that could no longer be hidden. The season's first snow drifted over Silver Creek, like a hushed secret, blanketing the rooftops in a delicate, cold shroud of white. Within the sanctuary of Jack Carter's cabin nestled at the forest's edge, the air was heavy with silence and the scent of coffee grown cold. A single lamp cast its glow on the wooden table, illuminating an open notebook, its pages filled with frantic notes, sketches, and the fragments of a dark suspicion. Across the room, Clara Bennett, the school's nurse, sat perfectly still, her coat still carrying the winter's chill. She had brought the truth in files, and a look that held no more doubt. Nearby, Noah and Olivia huddled close, their nervous hands betraying the fear they felt. The small recorder lay on the table, a silent weapon poised to strike. Jack leaned in the firelight, glinting off the silver chain at his throat. "Are you certain about this?" he murmured. Clara's nod was unwavering, her expression resolute. 5 children she revealed, all from the same class, all with injuries that defied their stories. She opened a folder, revealing photographs of faint bruises, doctor's notes, and the same chilling words. Slipped. Fell. An accident. Jack's jaw set like stone. Across the room, Emily curled on the couch, her crutches resting beside her. Rex lay faithfully at her feet. The dog's ears twitched at every sound, sensing the approaching storm before anyone else. Noah glanced at his mother, then pulled the device from his backpack. "I recorded her," he said, his voice small but unwavering. He placed the recorder on the table and pressed play. The room filled with a burst of static. Then the unmistakable voice of Martha Hale cut through, sharp, cold, and dripping with contempt. "Do you believe the world will pity you forever, Emily? Pity for a broken girl doesn't last. That's a lesson you must learn." Her words sliced through the air like a blade. Jack's hands clenched into tight fists. Clara paled instantly. Olivia covered her mouth in horror, as silent tears streamed down her face. Even Rex let out a deep growl that rumbled through the room like thunder. When the recording ended, the resulting silence was crushing. Jack paced by the window, his heavy breath fogging the cold pain. "We can't bury this," he finally declared. "If she stays in that classroom, she'll shatter more than just bones." Clara's nod was grim and immediate. "We take this to the school board," she affirmed. "But we have to be ready. Martha has powerful allies, people convinced she is beyond reproach." Jack turned from the window, his gaze burning with resolve. "Then we'll prove she's not." He rested a steadying hand on Noah's shoulder. "You did the right thing, son. It takes courage to stand up when everyone else is silent." The boy looked down, a flush rising on his cheeks, but the barest hint of a smile touched his lips. 2 days after that, they gathered for a solemn meeting in the town's community hall. The board members sat behind a long table, 5 adults in formal suits, their faces masks of cold neutrality. Across from them stood Martha Hale, poised and flawless as always. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, a lavender scarf draped elegantly around her neck. "These are extremely serious accusations," the chairman Peter Lang said, adjusting his glasses. "What is your response?" "Miss Hale?" Martha's smile was a polished mask. "Of course not," she replied coolly. "This is simply a misunderstanding. My methods are rigorous, but they yield results. Certain children require structure, not coddling. I never intended any harm." Her voice held that same chilling confidence that had fooled them all for years. Then Clara stood, her movement deliberate as she placed a thick stack of files on the table. "These are medical reports," she stated, her voice steady. 5 students, every one of them from Class 3A, all with injuries reported within the last 3 months. A coincidence of that magnitude is impossible. The board members shifted trading looks of deep unease. Martha's expression remained a frozen calm, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the table's edge. And then Noah stepped forward. He looked so small in his big jacket, clutching the recorder like a fragile, heavy truth. "Please, just listen," he whispered, and he pressed play. The room was consumed by Martha's voice, crystal clear, unbelievably cruel, and impossible to deny. "No one cries forever. The words hung in the air, echoing off the walls and tearing away every shred of her composure. For the first time, Martha's practiced smile shattered. "That could be edited," she snapped, taken completely out of context. We all know children lie, but the composure in her voice had vanished, replaced by the unmistakable tremble of panic. Clara moved closer. And if they lie, then why do their bruises tell the same story? Why does every single one of these files say the exact same thing? Then Jack's voice cut through the tension, quiet, but weighted with grief. "My daughter came home with bruises on her neck," he said, his voice raw. "She told me she fell. But children only lie when they're truly terrified." A heavy silence fell over the room. Even the chairman looked visibly shaken. Jack then reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. He turned to a page creased from being read over and over. "I wrote this down," he said softly, "the night my little girl stopped smiling." He began to read, his voice thick with emotion, but somehow steady. "She said Daddy at school, or I have to be quiet if I want to be safe." He lifted his gaze to meet theirs. "That is the price of silence." Martha involuntarily took a step back, her face ashen. For a fleeting moment, she wasn't a teacher, but a monster, forced to look at its own reflection. When the vote was called, the decision was unanimous. Martha Hale was to be suspended, effective immediately. The suspension would hold pending a full investigation. She said nothing as she collected her belongings, but a cold fury burned in her eyes. It was the bitterness of someone who had just lost all control. As she walked past Jack on her way out, he met her glare and did not look away. "You don't scare my daughter anymore," he said, his voice low. "And I think that's what truly scares you." She offered no reply, turning and vanishing out into the falling snow. In her wake, the board members departed in a strained, uncomfortable silence. Only the small group remained: Jack, Clara, Noah, and Olivia standing together under the flickering fluorescent lights. For the first time in months, the air finally felt breathable. Clara let out a long, slow breath, tears of relief shimmering in her eyes. "It's finally over," she whispered. Jack gazed out the window at the snowflakes pressing against the darkness. "No," he said gently. This is the beginning of the healing." His eyes found Emily waiting silently by the door. A small, fragile smile touched her lips. Her hand rested on Rex's fur, and the loyal dog gave a single knowing wag of his tail, as if he understood that their long, silent battle had at last been won. Later that night, back in the quiet of the cabin, a single lamp cast a warm glow across the table. Jack opened his notebook one final time and wrote, "Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a whisper carried on the voice of a child, brave enough to finally speak the truth." He gently closed it, his eyes tracing the silent descent of snow beyond the glass. By the fire, Rex lay peacefully, his rhythmic breaths the only sound in the stillness. Outside, Silver Creek slumbered beneath a blanket of white, oblivious that in one small classroom, a tempest of cruelty had at last been silenced. A month had now passed since the truth was finally revealed. The season's first snow had vanished, leaving shimmering puddles that reflected the faint light of the winter sun. Silver Creek Elementary seemed to stand in a hushed reverence, humbled by the events that transpired within its halls. The town had changed in subtle, quiet ways. Parents spoke to their children with a newfound gentleness. Teachers now listened with a deeper attention, and the laughter that echoed across the schoolyard was finally free of its cruel edge. For Emily Carter, each new morning still held a whisper of fear, yet it was no longer the paralyzing kind. It was a fear that was slowly, finally learning to let go. Class 3A was transformed. Fresh posters adorned the walls. The very air felt lighter, more hopeful. And at the head of the class stood Meister, Turner, their new teacher. A man in his mid-40s, tall with a gentle bearing, his soft gray hair framing eyes that smiled long before his mouth did. He chose warm sweaters over stiff suits. his sleeves perpetually rolled up, as if teaching was a work of both the heart and the hands. On his very first day, he mounted a small wooden plaque above the chalkboard. Its letters had been carved by hand, imperfect and uneven, yet etched with profound care. No one left behind. When Emily read those words, she felt a long, dormant warmth stir deep within her, a feeling she thought had been buried forever. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she truly smiled. Mr. Turner was a man who valued listening over speaking. He started every class with a simple ritual, asking each child to share one good thing from their week. Some spoke of epic snowball battles, others of baking cookies with their families. But when it was Emily's turn to share, she hesitated, but Mr. Turner waited with a patient stillness, a silent reassurance. "Rex chased the mailman again," she finally whispered, and the room filled with laughter, not the cruel, sharp kind, but a gentle, warm sound. Even laughter, she realized, could be a kindness, not a weapon. Mr. Turner nodded, a wide grin spreading across his face. "That's one courageous mail carrier," he said, and the entire class laughed once more, a sound of pure, effortless joy. Noah and Olivia had become her steadfast friends. The trio tackled every project together as a team, claiming the same table near the sunlit window. One afternoon, Mr. Turner introduced a new group assignment: build something that embodies fairness. The classroom erupted in a buzz of ideas, but the three of them simply shared a silent, knowing look. By the week's end, they had meticulously crafted a miniature classroom out of cardboard and clay, a world where every desk stood at the same height, every chair faced forward, and a small clay figure stood next to an even smaller one, its hand outstretched in an offering of help. As they presented their creation, a profound softness filled Mr. Turner's eyes. "Beautiful," he murmured. "Well, this is what school is meant to be." A wave of applause swept the room, and a warm blush colored Emily's cheeks, a flush born not of shame this time, but of pure, unadulterated pride. The following week began with a surprise assembly. The principal, Mrs. Langford, stood upon the stage holding a small, gleaming golden plaque. A ripple of curious whispers spread as Jack Carter walked into the auditorium, with Rex held proudly on his leash. The dog trotted with a noble air, his coat gleaming and his eyes full of light. Today, Mrs. Langford's voice rang out, "We honor a guardian who taught us all the true meaning of loyalty and unwavering courage." She raised the plaque, high, its inscription gleaming, "Guardian Dog of Silver Creek." The room erupted in a storm of applause. Rex cocked his head, bewildered by the sound, but Emily's laughter rang out as she clapped wildly. Jack's eyes shone with tears as he knelt by his faithful friend, gently scratching behind that loyal ear. "You earned this, boy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. After the ceremony, Jack was asked to share a few words. He stood before the children, his olive field jacket buttoned tight against the cold, the dog tag glinting at his throat. "Heroes don't always wear a uniform," he began, his voice steady yet filled with a quiet power. "Sometimes they're the ones sitting quietly in the back. Sometimes they're the voice that speaks up when everyone else is silent. And sometimes," he said, his gaze falling to Rex, "they walk on four legs." A few children chuckled, but his expression remained deeply earnest. "A hero is anyone who chooses kindness when it would be so much easier to just look away. Never forget that." His words fell over the room, settling like the quiet peace before a snowfall. In the days that followed, the wounds of the past began to heal, replaced by small, tender acts of kindness. Noah started helping other kids who were struggling with their reading. Olivia started volunteering in the library after school. And Emily, once so quiet, now confidently raised her hand in class. There were still moments of hesitation, when the echoes of cruel laughter tried to pull her back. But she knew she wasn't alone anymore. Sometimes she'd look up at the sign above the board, "No one left behind," and find her strength in those words. Mr. Turner would see her, and he'd just give a knowing nod, a silent acknowledgement that he understood. On a crisp Friday afternoon, the first breath of spring was in the air. The kids were packing their bags when Mr. Turner paused at Emily's desk. "You've shown incredible courage this semester," he said, his voice gentle. "The class sees you in a new light. Not for what happened, but for the person you've proven you are." He placed a small badge on her notebook, a little paper star carefully cut by hand. "Next week," he added, a warm smile spreading across his face, "well, you're going to be our class monitor." Emily blinked, stunned. "Me," he just nodded. "You've been a leader in spirit all along." This just makes it official." Her face lit up with a smile that could brighten the darkest room. That evening, the Carter home was filled with the glowing warmth of the fireplace. The rich scent of stew hung in the air, and Rex was curled up on the hearth, his loyal head resting gently in Emily's lap. She stroked his thick fur, her prosthetic leg catching the faint gleam of the firelight. "Dad," she said, her voice soft. Jack looked up from the table where he was meticulously polishing his old combat boots. "Yeah, sweetheart." A wide grin spread across her face. "They chose me to be the class leader." For a heartbeat, he just stared, and then a slow, proud smile broke across his face. "I always knew they'd see the strength I've seen in you all along." He reached over gently, brushing a strand of hair from her eyes. "You earned it." Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and silent. Jack leaned back in his chair, watching his daughter's joyful laugh as Rex nudged her hand, asking for another loving pat. The silver of her leg reflected the fire's warm glow, no longer a symbol of what was lost, but a testament to her unbreakable strength. "You know, Rex," Jack said quietly, a small smile playing on his lips as he looked at the dog. "She's the bravest soldier I ever had the honor to serve with." Emily laughed, rolling her eyes playfully, but she leaned in and wrapped her arms around him anyway. The warmth of that embrace seemed to fill the entire cabin. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, peace wasn't something they were fighting for. It was something they had finally found. It felt like home. As darkness fell upon Silver Creek, a gentle warmth emanated from the cabin window, a beacon against the endless white. It was not the light of a hearth, but of the resilient spirit of a family that had endured, battled, and ultimately chosen compassion. And in that glow, old wounds began to mend, the crushing silence lifted, and a family bound by love, courage, and the unwavering faith of a dog who never gave up finally found its way home to hope. In a world where cruelty wears a mask, and silence cuts deeper than any blade, kindness becomes the most silent measure of courage. This journey teaches us that compassion doesn't always roar. It often whispers in the deeds of ordinary people who choose to do what's right when no one is watching. True heroes are not those seeking the spotlight, but the ones who quietly mend broken spirits with their patience, their empathy, and selfless sacrifice. If this story touched your soul, please share it with someone who may need a ray of hope today. Tell us in the comments below how this story truly made you feel. Subscribe so you won't miss our next story of courage, love, and second chances. May you be blessed, your home kept safe, and may your own soul with peace.